This seat isn't for your kind. Then came the slap. Loud, public, cruel. The man hit the floor without a sound. His crumpled boarding pass fluttered beside him, like even the paper wanted to disappear. He didn't scream. He didn't fight back. He just lay there, one hand bracing on the carpet, the other gripping a canvas satchel like it held his whole life inside. No one moved. No one helped. But every single person on that first-class cabin watched. They didn't know who he was. Not yet. But in less than 10 minutes, the Pentagon would freeze the entire flight, just because of his name. Before we dive into this shocking story, tell us where you're watching from today. Have you ever seen someone mistreated in public and stayed silent? The man's name was Isaac Monroe, 68 years old, skin weathered like tree bark, wearing a military-style field jacket, 2 sizes too big, over an old button-up shirt. He looked like someone who hadn't been offered a hot meal or respect in years. Greg Simmons, the flight attendant who slapped him, stood with squared shoulders and a practiced smile fading fast. Greg wasn't just doing his job, he was making a point. "I said move," he repeated, louder now. "This is first class. You don't belong here." Isaac didn't answer. He slowly pushed himself up, using the seat arm for leverage. His movements were stiff, mechanical. The kind of stiffness that comes from bone-deep damage. The kind you earn in places no one cares to remember. Greg turned to the watching passengers, as if asking for silent approval. Instead, he got silence. And then, something slid out from Isaac's satchel. A small, round object. It clinked once on the aisle floor, spun, and landed near row 2D. It rolled to the feet of Colonel Daniel Harris, U.S. Air Force, retired, sitting by the window. He'd seen the whole thing, but, like everyone else, had done nothing. He leaned down to kick the object back, some coin or trinket, he thought. But then he saw it. The star, the ribbon, the golden etching. Colonel Harris froze. He reached down, picked up the medallion slowly, like it might burn him, and turned it over. The back was scratched but still legible. CPL Isaac J. Monroe, Medal of Honor, Mosul, 2004. His throat tightened. He couldn't breathe. That name, that mission, that citation. They said Monroe had vanished. Some whispered he deserted. Others said he died homeless. But no one had ever confirmed the truth. Until now. Harris looked up. His hands trembled. Greg didn't notice, still puffing up his chest. "We're not going to argue about it," Greg said. "If he doesn't have the proper ticket, he can wait for security to—" "Stop!" Harris's voice cut through the cabin like a crack of thunder. Greg turned. "Excuse me? You will not touch that man again," Harris said, rising from his seat. "What's your issue?" Greg asked, annoyed. This guy is a Medal of Honor recipient." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone dropped their phone. A woman in 1A whispered, "Oh my God." Isaac stood frozen, still half bent, eyes scanning the room like he wasn't sure any of this was real. The captain emerged from the cockpit. "What's going on here?" Harris stepped forward. "Captain, I am formally requesting that this flight be held. This man is Corporal Isaac Monroe, Medal of Honor, presumed missing for 2 decades, and he was just assaulted on your aircraft." The captain blinked, then turned and picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "this aircraft will remain at the gate pending military instructions. Please remain seated." Isaac didn't say a word. He lowered himself into the seat they tried to take from him, 3C, and stared at the medallion in Colonel Harris's hand. "I didn't think anyone remembered," he murmured, voice quiet and ragged. Harris sat beside him, eyes still wet. "They tried to erase you," he said, "but they failed." And somewhere, deep inside Isaac's chest, a long-forgotten part of him began to breathe again. Colonel Daniel Harris held the Medal of Honor in his hand like it was ticking. He couldn't take his eyes off it, and yet He couldn't look Isaac Monroe in the face either. Not yet. The name engraved on the back, so casually carried in a canvas bag, hit harder than any punch Greg Simmons could have thrown. CPL Isaac J. Monroe, Mosul, 2004. A name whispered through war rooms and military academies for decades. Not because of rank, but because of the silence that followed it. The cabin wasn't just quiet now. It was frozen. The co-pilot stood near the cockpit door, confusion on his face. "Colonel, I need clarification. Are you confirming identity?" "I am," Harris replied, loud enough for the front of the cabin to hear. "He's been missing for 20 years. His name was never cleared, but now he's here, on this plane, and that man," he gestured to Greg Simmons, "just physically assaulted him." Greg's mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this aircraft will remain at the gate until further notice. A federal situation is developing. Please remain seated and do not approach the aisles." Passengers looked at each other, some in disbelief, some already recording. Isaac hadn't moved much since getting back in his seat. His bag rested on his lap again, the flap still open. His hands were steady now, too steady, like he'd slipped back into combat readiness. "Corporal," Harris said, turning to him, "I need to make a secure call." Isaac gave a small nod. "Do what you have to do." Harris turned toward the cockpit. "I need access to a secure satellite line. Now." One of the pilots guided him inside. Meanwhile, Greg remained rooted where he stood, sweating through his perfectly pressed uniform. I didn't know," he stammered. "He looked like a drifter." "He looked like a veteran," said a voice from behind him. It came from a silver-haired woman in 2A. She stood slowly, her voice trembling but sharp. "My husband was in Fallujah. He wore that same jacket when he came home. So maybe sit down before you embarrass yourself any further." Greg backed away and disappeared into the galley. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15, and then Harris returned from the cockpit. This time, not alone. A military escort had arrived. 2 young Marines in full uniform stepped into the first-class cabin, holding a small black case. Behind them, a man in civilian clothes followed, a Department of Defense liaison. He walked directly to Isaac, knelt to eye level, and said quietly, "Sir, you've been found." Isaac blinked. The DoD officer continued, "We've confirmed your ID, matched the medal serial, and cross-referenced your voice signature with classified files from Mosul, including audio logs you may not know existed. You are Corporal Isaac Monroe, recipient of the Medal of Honor. And on behalf of the Department of Defense, I offer our deepest apologies." Isaac didn't say a word. The Marines opened the case. Inside was a satellite phone and a crisp folder with government seals. Harris held it out. "They've already reinstated your full record. As of 10 minutes ago, you're no longer listed as AWOL. You're officially recognized as retired with full honors, retroactive to 2004. He hesitated. "And they want to fix the rest." Isaac's voice was low, gritty. "Fix what?" "The system that erased you." Across the aisle, passengers had gone quiet again, this time for a different reason. A few had tears in their eyes. A couple had removed their hats. And one by one, the cabin slowly began to rise, not to leave, to stand, in silence, in respect. Greg peeked out from the galley again, only to see everyone standing. His expression twisted, half guilt, half fear. He backed away again without a word. Harris stepped toward the center aisle and addressed the plane. 20 years ago, this man saved 6 lives in Mosul. He was injured, left without proper care, mislabeled as a deserter, and forgotten. Today, we remember, not just who he is, but what he represents. He turned toward Isaac. "You stood for this country when no one else would. Now, finally, we stand for you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. A few minutes later, the captain's voice returned. "We've received federal orders to hold the flight and escort Mr. Monroe to military transport. We thank you for your patience and your respect." The Marine stepped forward. One extended a hand. Isaac stood slowly, his joints stiff but posture upright, like instinct, like training. As he moved toward the exit, the passengers remained standing. One woman clutched her chest. A man in 1D saluted quietly, and as Isaac passed Greg Simmons, he didn't speak. He didn't look. But Greg flinched anyway. Because silence, real silence, has weight. Outside the jet bridge, black SUVs waited. A new life. Or maybe the one he was always owed. But as Isaac reached the top of the steps, he turned back for a second, just long enough to see that the people who once stared at him like a mistake now watched like they'd seen a ghost come home. Mosul, Iraq. April 17th, 2004. The air smelled like oil and gunpowder. Corporal Isaac Monroe crouched behind a half-collapsed concrete wall, sweat pouring down the back of his neck. His rifle barrel steamed in the dry heat. Sand stuck to everything, his skin, his lips, his memory. 2 o'clock, 3 on the roof, someone shouted. Gunfire answered a second later. They were pinned. A supply convoy had broken down outside Sector 6, one of the worst zones in Mosul. Monroe's unit had been rerouted to escort the trucks through, but they never made it out. Ambushed, heavy fire, RPGs. Radio cut off within the first 5 minutes. There were 18 Marines. By the time Monroe crawled into that alleyway, 7 were down. He turned to the bloodied soldier next to him, Private Lujan, barely breathing. "Hang in there, kid," Isaac said, ripping his last bandage open with his teeth. Across the street, Lieutenant Jack Parker, fresh out of Annapolis, was trying to pull another Marine out of the line of fire. The wounded man screamed as bullets rained down. Jack kept crawling forward. "Damn fool," Monroe muttered. And then he moved. He didn't ask permission, didn't wait for cover. He ran, straight into the gunfire. The first bullet missed his shoulder by inches. The second caught the edge of his vest, tore through the strap, and knocked him sideways into the dirt. He got back up. By the time he reached Parker, the young lieutenant was nearly unconscious. The other Marine, Sanchez, was gone. Isaac grabbed Jack by the collar and dragged him back one-handed, firing with the other. His M4 clicked dry halfway through the alley. He threw it and kept pulling. Dust choked his lungs. Blood soaked into his knees. A grenade hit behind them. Shrapnel bit his thigh. Still, he moved. When he reached the wall again, the rest of the surviving Marines were forming a perimeter. One of them, Sergeant Wills, saw him and screamed, "We thought you were dead!" "Not yet," Isaac muttered. He laid Parker down behind cover, tore open his jacket, checked for vitals. The kid had taken 2 rounds to the shoulder and 1 in the side, bleeding fast. "He's going to bleed out," someone shouted. "No, he's not," Isaac said. He took Parker's belt, tied a tourniquet, stuffed gauze into the wound, and slapped the lieutenant's cheek until his eyes fluttered. "You're not dying today, sir," he growled. "Not on my watch." They held position for another 11 minutes before evac arrived. A medevac chopper touched down 2 blocks over. The crew called for injured first. Monroe lifted Parker over his shoulder and sprinted through falling mortar shells. By the time he got him on the chopper, Isaac could barely stand. He didn't go with them. There were still 4 more Marines behind the wall. He turned around and ran back. By nightfall, the unit had lost 9 men, but 7 more survived because of Monroe's madness. His body took shrapnel in 3 places. He had a concussion, a torn knee, and 18 stitches down his rib cage. Still, when command asked who the hell had pulled Parker and the others out, everyone answered the same. Monroe. It was Monroe. 3 weeks later, back at base in Ramadi, Isaac stood in front of a folding table as a colonel read his commendation aloud. Medal of Honor nomination pending. Praise from superiors. Salutes from peers. But Monroe didn't smile. His eyes were somewhere else, on a letter in his pocket. His wife had written it from D.C. She didn't recognize him anymore, she said. Their son cried when he called. She needed time. The day the medal was approved, Monroe never showed up to the ceremony. He boarded a transport back to the States and never filed his transition papers. He didn't go to the VA. He didn't call command. He disappeared. For years, the official record showed Corporal Isaac Monroe, MIA, AWOL, unconfirmed. Some whispered he'd lost his mind. Some believed he'd died, but none of them knew that he was sleeping under bridges in Albuquerque, wearing the same jacket from that alley in Mosul, carrying the medal in his satchel like a wound he couldn't stop reopening. He never spoke about that day, not even to the other veterans who passed him in the shelters. He just kept moving, until a travel voucher showed up in a church mailbox with his name typed on it. No note, no sender. Just a seat on Flight 227 to Washington, D.C. He didn't ask questions. He just folded the paper, packed the satchel, and walked to the airport. Back in the present, on the tarmac at Albuquerque International, the military SUV pulled away from the jet bridge. Isaac sat quietly in the back seat, medal still in hand, watching the sun set behind the mountains. He hadn't planned to be found. He wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in 2 decades, someone had said his name out loud, and not like a rumor, like a man who mattered. The clock on the wall inside the Pentagon's Crisis Response Center read 5:42 a.m. The room wasn't full of chaos, not the way movies show it. It was quieter than that. Heavier, like everyone in the room knew something big had just been uncovered, and none of them had a script for it. On the main screen, live footage from Flight 227 was paused. In the frame, Isaac Monroe, seated in first class, Medal of Honor in his hand. 2 Marines standing beside him, the rest of the cabin rising in silence. A woman in a gray suit leaned forward in her chair, eyes narrowed. Play it again, from the moment the medal hits the floor. An analyst tapped a key. The clip restarted. Slap, fall, the clink of metal, the colonel's face going pale, the phone call, the cabin standing. When it ended, no one spoke. Then a voice at the end of the table broke the silence. 20 years, said Major General Leon Myers. We lost track of a Medal of Honor recipient for 20 damn years. Correction, said Deputy Secretary Rachel Vaughn. We didn't lose him, we buried him. The system buried him. 2 hours earlier, D.C. VA headquarters. A junior intake clerk named Jenna Fields had just clocked in when the override alert hit her screen. Subject reclassified, Monroe, Isaac J. Status, AWOL honorably retired. Medal of Honor. Recipient confirmed. Initiate auto review of all flagged cases with matching classification code. Jenna blinked. She'd never seen the system do that before. A flood of files began generating underneath the alert. 1 case, then 50, then 400, then 3,219. All listed as AWOL. All had records that showed signs of misfiling, lost documentation, or unprocessed medical discharges. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. We've got a domino effect, she told her supervisor. And Monroe is just the first. Back in the Pentagon. By 6:30 a.m., a task force was formed. By 6:45, it had a name. Operation Final Honor. Their goal wasn't just to verify Isaac Monroe's case. It was to audit every single AWOL-tagged veteran record from 1990 through 2010. The early estimate, nearly 11,000 veterans may have been affected by administrative error, negligence, or worse, disregard. Deputy Secretary Vaughn stood at the head of the table, holding a folder. This man didn't just save lives in Mosul. He's about to force a reckoning in how we treat our own. We've spent decades telling the world we don't leave our people behind. Turns out, we've been leaving them right here, in our streets, under our nose. She held up Isaac's Medal of Honor, now officially logged and authenticated. And he carried this in a canvas bag while sleeping behind churches. No one said a word. Then she added, "I want this on the Hill by noon. Capitol Hill, 1:12 p.m. In a secured committee room, a closed-door session was underway. A screen displayed the title, Veteran Status Reclassification Hearing. Case number 001. Corporal Isaac J. Monroe. Testifying at the table was General Hawkins, head of the Army's Record Division. "We've identified a breakdown in the post-deployment intake pipeline," he said. Particularly during the early Iraq years, Monroe's case was misfiled under an outdated medical code. That code auto-flagged him as non-compliant, failure to report, which in turn triggered the AWOL designation. A senator leaned forward. "Was he ever notified?" "No, sir. The system removed his access to VA communications once the flag went live. He essentially became invisible." The room went cold. Another senator whispered, "How many others are invisible?" White House, 3:00 p.m. A folder was placed on the president's desk. He opened it slowly. Inside, a photo of Isaac Monroe, walking off the plane, Medal of Honor in one hand, satchel in the other. A post-it stuck to the folder's edge read, "Recommend executive action. Monroe Directive draft enclosed." The president didn't need convincing. He picked up the pen. 7:00 p.m. National news breaking alert. A historic shift in veteran policy today, after the discovery of Corporal Isaac Monroe, believed missing for 20 years, on board a commercial flight in New Mexico. Monroe, a Medal of Honor recipient, had been misclassified by the Department of Defense, losing all rights and recognition. A new executive order, titled the Monroe Directive, is expected to be signed within the hour. Isaac's temporary housing, Washington, D.C. The lights were soft, the walls were plain, but the bed was warm and clean and quiet. Isaac sat at the small table, the medal laid flat before him. Next to it, a folder full of papers he hadn't asked for, restored military benefits, full back pay, $1.16 million, lifetime VA coverage, and a key to an apartment reserved for Medal of Honor recipients. The TV across the room buzzed with muted headlines. Monroe Directive announced. Review of 11,000 veteran records begins. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just ran a finger across the medal, the same way he used to trace the names on dog tags in the field. Slowly, quietly. Behind him, a knock came at the door. When he opened it, a young Marine stood at attention. "Sir," she said, "General Hawkins requests your presence at the Capitol tomorrow. They'd like to name the directive after you formally. He said it's your call." Isaac looked past her, out the window, toward the city that once erased him. Then back to her. "Tell him I'll think about it." Greg Simmons hadn't slept much since the story broke. The clip had gone viral overnight, spreading like wildfire across news feeds and group chats. Flight attendant slaps black veteran. Then Pentagon intervenes. Millions of views, thousands of comments, most of them calling for his resignation, some asking for his arrest. His name wasn't even in the original footage, but someone leaked the crew roster, and it didn't take long for the internet to do what it always does. Now, Greg Simmons was the man who slapped a Medal of Honor recipient. He stared at his phone, the screen lighting up with another email from HR. Pending disciplinary review. You are not to report to any flights until further notice. He swiped it away and rubbed his temples. Just yesterday, he'd been a senior flight attendant with 6 years of experience and a spotless file. Now, he couldn't even walk into a grocery store without someone recognizing him. At first, Greg tried to defend himself. In the comments, in DMs, even to a local reporter who camped outside his apartment. "I didn't know who he was," he kept saying. "He looked like a vagrant, like he didn't belong." But every time he said it, the words felt smaller, uglier, and the world didn't care. Because it wasn't just about who Isaac Monroe was, it was about what Greg had assumed. By noon, the airline had issued an official apology. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on Flight 227. The conduct exhibited does not reflect our values. The crew member involved has been suspended pending investigation." Greg read it 3 times. They hadn't used his name, but they didn't need to. He was trending. That afternoon, he got a call from an old friend, Tommy, a gate agent he used to grab lunch with at Terminal B. "I gotta tell you, man," Tommy said gently. "I've worked with you a long time. You were always good with passengers. But this feels bigger than you know." Greg didn't respond. Tommy continued. "I saw Monroe's face on TV. I looked him up. You know what they're saying now? He's not just getting his benefits back. They're rewriting protocol across federal carriers. They're even calling it the Monroe Standard. Every crew's going to be trained differently from now on." Greg chuckled bitterly. "Great. My name's going to be a cautionary tale in every HR slideshow." Tommy paused, then said softly, "You ever wonder why you didn't ask for his ID? Why you didn't double-check the system?" Greg didn't answer, because he already knew. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind his apartment complex, Greg sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through headlines he didn't want to read. From forgotten hero to national reform, how one man changed everything. The Monroe Directive, a reckoning in veteran affairs. Flight 227, the day America stood still and stood up. The comments below were merciless. This man sat in silence while others looked down on him. That's strength. "I hope that flight attendant never works again. They didn't know who he was, but they'll never forget now." Greg dropped the phone onto the floor and leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. For years, he thought no one noticed moments like that. He thought it was just part of the job, enforcing order, keeping first class exclusive, making sure passengers fit the profile. He never realized how thin the line was between procedure and prejudice. And now, he couldn't stop hearing that moment in his head. "This seat isn't for your kind." He had said it like it meant nothing, but it had meant everything. You ever witness a moment like that? Someone being treated less than, just because of how they looked, dressed, or spoke? What did you do? Did you speak up? Or did you look away like Colonel Harris almost did? Greg looked up at the clock on the wall, 8:27 p.m. He hadn't eaten all day. He walked to the fridge. Nothing but a half-empty bottle of orange juice and some leftover takeout. He grabbed a slice of cold pizza and stood at the window, looking down at the parking lot. The world felt distant now, like he was watching life happen from behind glass. Tomorrow, he had another call with the airline's disciplinary board. His union rep said they might let him resign quietly, avoid a public firing. But deep down, Greg knew something had already been taken from him. And it wasn't just his job. It was certainty. The certainty that he was a good guy, that he didn't mean anything by it, that he saw people clearly. Turns out, he hadn't seen Isaac Monroe at all. He'd only seen what he wanted to see. And now the whole world was seeing him for exactly who he was. The envelope was heavy, too heavy for paper. It arrived by courier, sealed in navy blue, with the gold-embossed emblem of the United States Congress. The man delivering it stood in full dress uniform, but Isaac barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the name printed across the front. CPL Isaac J. Monroe, United States Marine Corps, Retee. He hadn't seen it written like that in over 20 years, not on anything official. "Sir," the courier said with practiced formality, "they'd be honored to have you." Isaac nodded slowly. "I'll look it over." He closed the door gently. He didn't open the envelope right away. That night, he sat at the kitchen table in the small apartment they'd set him up with, just until permanent housing was arranged. It was modest. White walls, a twin bed, a nightstand, and a table with 2 chairs he'd never use at the same time. The folder from the Department of Defense still sat unopened beside the envelope, full of back pay documents, benefit reinstatements, and letters of apology printed on letterhead that probably cost more than his entire military stipend back in 2004. Isaac stared at the envelope a long time before sliding his thumb under the flap. Inside was an invitation, formal, impeccable. You are hereby invited to appear before a joint session of Congress for formal recognition of your service, your sacrifice, and your historic role in triggering veteran reform across the nation. The session will be broadcast live. National media coverage expected. Please prepare brief remarks or request assistance if desired. He let the card rest on the table. He didn't touch it again for hours. The next morning, a knock came. It wasn't military. It wasn't press. It was Colonel Harris, now in civilian clothes but carrying that same quiet gravity as always. "I figured you might want breakfast," Harris said, holding up 2 paper bags and a coffee tray. "There's a diner 3 blocks from here, veteran-owned." Isaac stepped aside and let him in. They ate in silence for a while. Eggs, toast, no small talk. Then Harris cleared his throat. "I assume you got the envelope?" Isaac nodded. "Got it? And?" Isaac took a long sip of coffee. "I'm not sure I want to go." Harris set down his fork. "Why not?" Isaac didn't answer immediately. He looked out the small window above the sink. "They want me to be the face of something I didn't ask for," he said finally. "They want me to smile, wave, wear the medal like it means something." "It does mean something," Harris said quietly. "Not to them," Isaac snapped. "Not until it embarrassed them. Not until it was caught on camera." Harris leaned back, letting the words sit. After a pause, he said, "You're right, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be seen." Isaac shook his head. "You ever spend 20 years invisible, Colonel? Ever sit in the back of a bus station and wonder if you're even real anymore?" Harris didn't respond. He didn't have to. Isaac exhaled. "I didn't survive all this to become someone's headline." Harris stood and walked to the door. "They don't deserve you, Isaac," he said softly. "But the ones who've been forgotten like you, they do." Then he left. That night, Isaac didn't sleep. He sat at the table, flipping through the invitation again. He imagined himself standing in that massive chamber, bright lights, cameras, applause. His name spoken by men and women who would have stepped over him a month ago if they'd seen him on the sidewalk. But he also imagined something else. A row of chairs, old boots, folded hands. The quiet dignity of men who came home in pieces, if they came home at all. They wouldn't have gotten invitations. They wouldn't have gotten their names back. He couldn't stand in front of Congress for himself, but maybe he could stand for them. The next morning, he called the number on the RSVP card. A staffer answered. "This is Corporal Isaac Monroe," he said, voice steady. "Tell the speaker I'll come." He paused. "But I'm not reading a speech." The day arrived. Washington buzzed with anticipation. Outside the Capitol, reporters gathered by the dozen. Inside, a seat had been reserved at the front of the chamber, flagged with his name, a folded flag, and an honor guard at attention. As Isaac entered, wearing a dark suit borrowed from the Marine League, every head in the room turned. Applause began slowly, then grew and grew. Senators stood. Representatives stood. Military brass stood. The whole room, just like that plane, rose for him. Isaac didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just walked to his seat, sat down quietly, and waited. When called to the podium, he didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. He stepped up, adjusted the mic, looked out over the room. Then he said, "I was Corporal Isaac Monroe in 2004. Then I became a ghost. Not because I died, but because the system let me disappear. There are thousands like me. You don't know their names. You didn't see their faces. But if you're going to stand for me now, you'd better go find them too." He stepped back. That was all. And it was more than enough. The speech lasted just under 60 seconds, but the silence afterward, that stretched for what felt like a lifetime. Isaac Monroe had stepped off the podium at the Capitol without applause, not because no one cared, but because no one wanted to break the weight of his final words. "If you're going to stand for me now, you'd better go find them too." And in homes across the country, something began to shift. In a small town in Georgia, an 82-year-old widow sat in her kitchen with the TV on, her teacup trembling slightly in her hand. She leaned forward as the news replayed Isaac's speech, her eyes locked onto the screen. Then she whispered aloud to no one, "That sounds just like Daniel." She stood up, shuffled to her hallway closet, and pulled down an old shoebox. Inside, medals, discharge papers, and a photo of a young black man in fatigues. Last seen in 2007, she had filed missing veteran claims 3 times. Each time, the system told her, "Unable to locate, case closed." Until now. In Detroit, a nurse named Kayana Torres got off her night shift and sat on the couch to eat leftover noodles. She flipped through her phone and saw Isaac trending again. One clip stopped her cold. It was the moment he stood at the Capitol, voice low but clear. "I became a ghost, not because I died, but because the system let me disappear." She stared at the screen, blinking fast. Her uncle had served in Iraq, disappeared after a medical discharge that was never fully explained. No funeral, no gravestone, just silence. She picked up her phone. "Hi, VA hotline?" "Yeah, I think I need to reopen a case." Across the country, phones rang. Emails flooded in. Old cases reopened, new ones discovered. The Monroe Directive wasn't just a policy anymore. It was a movement. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Isaac didn't check the news. He didn't watch the coverage. He spent the next day sitting in a park near the Capitol, wearing a windbreaker and sipping from a thermos like any other retiree in town. Pigeons walked near his boots. Kids rode scooters around his bench. He looked like no one important. And that's how he liked it. Until a staffer from the VA showed up, slightly out of breath, holding a small manila envelope. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you," she said, polite but urgent. "This came through our redirected mail unit. It's for you." Isaac hesitated. "What is it?" She handed it over gently. "I don't know, but it's personal." He waited until she left. Then he opened the flap. Inside was a single folded letter, no return address, just handwriting. He recognized it instantly. "Dear Dad, I don't know if this will reach you. Mom said you were gone. She didn't mean dead, just gone. She never talked about why. She just cried a lot. I grew up not really knowing what to think about you. I used to tell people you were still deployed, that one day you'd come back and pick me up from school in uniform. That day never came. But I saw you. On TV, at the Capitol. I knew it was you the second I heard your voice. You looked tired, but you also looked alive. And that made me want to write this. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet. I'm 24 now. My name's Marcus. I live in Baltimore. Same last name. Hope that's okay. Marcus." Isaac didn't breathe for a long time. He just stared at the paper like it might disappear if he blinked. Marcus. His son. 24 now. The last time he held Marcus, the boy was still small enough to ride on his shoulders. Still liked peanut butter crackers. Still had the same big eyes that made Isaac feel like he was someone worth being. He folded the letter slowly, then sat back on the bench, letting the spring wind push gently through the trees. He didn't cry, not yet, but he smiled. A small one. Quiet. The kind that hurts in the best way. Later that night, he sat at his kitchen table. Same chair, same routine. A fresh envelope lay open in front of him. Inside, a photo. Marcus, grown now. In a black t-shirt, smiling, shy but steady. Behind him, a small apartment kitchen. Clean. Simple. There was a sticky note clipped to the bottom. P.S. I still keep peanut butter crackers in the cabinet, just in case. Sometimes justice comes through courts, sometimes through cameras. But the deepest kind? The kind Isaac Monroe had waited decades for. It came from a letter, a name, a memory that hadn't given up. And it sounded a lot like, "Hi, Dad." The train ride from D.C. to Baltimore was barely an hour. But to Isaac Monroe, it felt longer than any mission he'd ever flown into. He sat near the window, a small black bag resting on his knees. Inside was the Medal of Honor, not in a display box, not in velvet, just the medal. Worn, solid, real. His palms had been sweating since Union Station. Every second that passed brought him closer to a reunion he never expected. A reunion he didn't know he deserved. The platform at Penn Station was quiet that morning. A light drizzle tapped against the steel beams above. Isaac stepped off the train, scanning faces without realizing he was doing it. And then he saw him. A young man, tall, built like an athlete, but standing like someone unsure of his footing. He wore a windbreaker, jeans, and a nervous smile. Isaac stopped 5 feet away. "Marcus?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I wasn't sure if I should wave or salute or something." Isaac let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. No salutes today. They stood in silence for a beat too long. Then Marcus stepped forward. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, voice quieter now. "I didn't even know if you'd get the letter." "I got it," Isaac replied. "Read it 3 times. Thought about it for 10 days. Marcus laughed awkwardly. "That sounds about right." Isaac looked him in the eye. "You look like your mother." Marcus nodded. "That's what people say." Another pause. Then Marcus said, "Want to grab coffee? There's a spot a few blocks from here. It's nothing fancy, but they leave you alone. Good for first, whatever this is." Isaac nodded. "Lead the way." The coffee shop was nearly empty. Brick walls, low music. The kind of place where people wore headphones and avoided eye contact. They picked a booth in the back. Marcus ordered a black coffee. Isaac did too. No sugar, no cream, just strong and simple. For a while they sat there, sipping, listening to the hum of conversation around them. Then Marcus said, "I used to imagine this moment a lot. You showing up, saying something cool like in the movies." Isaac smiled. "I don't do speeches." "That's okay," Marcus said. "Neither do I." They talked, slowly, carefully, about small things first, work, weather, sports. Then about heavier thing, what Marcus remembered, what Isaac had missed. Isaac never asked about his ex-wife. Marcus never offered. Some wounds didn't need picking at just yet. Eventually, the conversation drifted into silence. And that's when Isaac reached for the black bag. "I brought something," he said. Marcus looked puzzled. "You didn't have to." Isaac slid the bag across the table. Marcus opened it. Inside, the Medal of Honor rested in his hands. He froze. I don't understand." Isaac leaned forward, voice low. "You don't give this to yourself. You don't earn it alone. That day in Mosul, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to keep promises, to men I served with, to a commander I believed in, to a kid I'd never met who needed to know his father didn't give up." Marcus blinked fast, holding the medal like it might break. "I wore this in silence for 20 years, Isaac continued. "Now the world knows my name again. But what matters to me isn't headlines or ceremonies. It's sitting here, right now, with my son." He pushed the medal closer. "I want you to have it." Marcus looked stunned. "I can't. I didn't earn this." Isaac gave a tired smile. "Maybe not with bullets, but you waited. You reached out. You carried my name when I couldn't. That counts for something." They sat there a long time. A father, a son, a piece of metal between them that meant more than history could explain. Eventually, Marcus spoke. "I don't want to keep it locked away." "You shouldn't," Isaac replied. I mean, maybe it shouldn't sit on a shelf or in a museum, Marcus said. Maybe it should go somewhere it matters, a place where people who were forgotten can see they weren't alone. Isaac's eyes softened. You got a place in mind? Marcus nodded. There's a new VA support center being built in Baltimore. They're setting up a wing just for vets who were misclassified or lost in the system. They don't have a name for it yet. Isaac smiled slowly. Maybe they do now. A week later, the Monroe Center for Veterans Honor opened its doors. At the front, a glass display case with one item inside. Not polished, not cleaned up, just honest. The Medal of Honor. Beside it, a plaque with 2 lines. He carried it in silence. Now we carry his name. That same day, Isaac and Marcus sat side by side at the ribbon cutting. No cameras, no speeches, just families. Veterans, staff. After the event, they walked the grounds together. Still got those peanut butter crackers? Isaac asked. Marcus smirked. Cabinet on the left, Isaac chuckled. Might have to stay a while then. You're welcome to, Marcus said. Then, quieter. We've got time. And for the first time in years, Isaac believed it. It started with a knock. Not from press, not from government, not from anyone looking for headlines. Just a man in a faded denim jacket and an old army cap, standing at the door of the Monroe Veterans Center, holding a folder that had yellowed with time. He didn't say much, just, I heard you might be able to help me find myself again. The receptionist smiled and offered him coffee. 15 minutes later, he was sitting in the back courtyard with Isaac Monroe. No camera crews, no framed medals, just 2 men in a silence that only veterans could understand. They talked for an hour, and when the man stood up, his back was straighter than when he arrived. By the end of the week, it had happened 6 more times. Different faces, same stories. Misclassified, forgotten, told to disappear politely by a system too busy to remember them. And yet somehow, they found their way to Baltimore. To a man who didn't wear a suit, didn't give interviews, didn't sign books, just sat across from them, listened, and sometimes said something simple like, I've been where you are. You're not lost. You're just waiting to be seen. By mid-month, word had spread. Not through news channels, through bus stops, shelter lines, church basements, community boards at barbershops and VFW halls. The story had legs not because it was loud, but because it was true. And truth has a funny way of traveling. At a center in Pittsburgh, an 80-year-old Vietnam vet showed up with nothing but a dog tag and a hospital bracelet. I saw the clip, he said. The man with the quiet voice said we weren't invisible. I figured, maybe I'm not either. In Phoenix, a former Navy corpsman who had spent 10 years avoiding the VA finally walked into a clinic and asked for a reevaluation. When asked what changed, he simply said, Isaac Monroe happened. Back in Baltimore, Isaac continued showing up every day, never with fanfare, never with speeches. He sat at the same table by the window, brought 2 coffees every morning, one for him, one for whoever might show up. Sometimes no one did. Other times there was a line by 9 a.m. He never turned anyone away. One afternoon, a young woman, early 30s, marine haircut, tattoos down both arms, walked into the center carrying a duffel bag. She didn't take a seat right away, just hovered in the lobby, watching Isaac from a distance like she wasn't sure he was real. He noticed. You served? He asked gently, motioning to the anchor tattoo on her wrist. She nodded. Didn't end the way it should have. He stood and offered her the second coffee. She took it without speaking. They sat. No one wrote down what was said. No one needed to. She left with a referral, a folder, a fresh copy of her DD-214, and a smile that hadn't shown itself in a long time. Later that evening, as Isaac locked up the front entrance, Marcus walked up holding a newspaper. Front page again, he said, grinning. But don't worry. They used the photo from behind this time. Said you're the man with the back that built a movement. Isaac chuckled. You can't start something by accident if you don't show your face. Marcus shrugged. Maybe that's what makes it stick. They stood there for a minute, watching the street traffic slow down with dusk. Then Marcus asked, You ever think about retiring? For real this time? Isaac looked at him sideways. From what? Sitting and drinking coffee? Marcus smirked. From being a symbol. Isaac didn't answer right away, then said quietly, Symbols fade, but presence doesn't. So I'll stay a little while longer. Before they went inside, a woman stepped out of a parked car across the street. She looked nervous, clutched a folder to her chest. She didn't cross right away, just stood there like she was building courage. Isaac saw her. He didn't wave, didn't call out. He just walked to the coffee machine inside and brewed another cup. Just in case. You ever meet someone who changed your life without saying much? Not because they tried to impress you, but because they saw you when no one else did. Tell us about them in the comments. Sometimes the quiet ones leave the loudest marks. The visitor was waiting by the front desk when Isaac arrived that morning. She wasn't a veteran, wasn't press, didn't look like she needed help, but she stood with purpose, a tailored blazer, a folder tucked neatly under one arm, and a calm, measured expression like someone used to boardrooms and closed-door decisions. Isaac noticed her right away. Can I help you? He asked. She stepped forward, hand out. Dr. Alyssa Brenner. I'm with the Department of Education. I flew in from D.C. this morning, just to talk to you. Isaac raised an eyebrow, shook her hand. That sounds serious. She smiled. It is, but also long overdue. They sat in the conference room, 2 cups of coffee between them. Isaac stayed quiet as she opened the folder. Inside were photos, letters, and a printout of a proposed pilot program titled The Monroe Curriculum, Character, Sacrifice, and Systemic Accountability in American History. Isaac stared at it for a long moment before speaking. You want to teach my story? Dr. Brenner nodded. Not just yours, but what it revealed. About who we forget, why we forget them, and what it costs. She leaned in slightly. We spend years teaching kids names from textbooks, Washington, Lincoln, Patton, but we never teach them about the Isaac Monroes, the ones who didn't make it into statues but carried just as much weight, sometimes more. Isaac exhaled. I'm not a role model. Maybe not, she said, but you're real, and that matters more. Dr. Brenner explained that since the speech at the Capitol, hundreds of educators had reached out to her office. History teachers, civics professors, military trainers. They weren't asking for policies. They were asking for context. They wanted students to understand that service doesn't end in uniform, and that systems fail not because people are evil, but because people stop paying attention. They want to use your journey to ask bigger questions, she said, about justice, about silence, about who gets remembered and why. Isaac sat back. He looked out the window toward the flagpole where the stars and stripes moved gently in the breeze. Then he said, If I say yes, do I have to speak in classrooms? Be on camera? Dr. Brenner smiled. No, sir. We already have your words. The speech at the Capitol, the footage from the plane, even the transcript of that first conversation you had with the Marine in the lobby. Isaac chuckled. Didn't know I was giving interviews that day. Sometimes the best ones happen when you're just being human. She placed a final document on the table, a signed letter of support from the Secretary of Education, co-signed by veterans organizations, military academies, and even a few major universities. We want to start in 10 school districts, she said, then grow from there. By next year, this could be national. Isaac traced his finger over the title again, The Monroe Curriculum. He didn't speak for a while. Then, quietly, he asked, Can it include their names too? Whose names? The ones we haven't found yet, the ones still out there. Dr. Brenner smiled. That's exactly the point. A week later, Isaac stood in a small auditorium in Maryland. Not to give a speech, but just to watch. The pilot launch of the curriculum had begun at a local high school. On stage, a student stood nervously at the mic. 17, maybe. Hair tied back, voice steady. She was reading a letter she'd written after studying the Monroe case. I used to think heroes wore capes. Then I thought they wore medals. But now I think heroes are the ones who keep showing up, even when no one claps for them. Mr. Monroe, I don't know you, but I see you, and I'll remember. Isaac shifted in his seat. Didn't cry, didn't clap. Just sat a little taller. After the program, students gathered in small groups. One approached him, shy. Sir, my uncle served, but we lost him after deployment. No records, no contact. I'm gonna try again. File his name. They're saying now the system's actually checking things. Isaac nodded. Don't give up. Sometimes the silence just needs the right person to speak into it. That night, Isaac walked the long way back to the train station. The city buzzed around him, alive with noise and light. But inside, he carried a different kind of peace. He had spent years believing his story ended the day the government labeled him AWOL. But now, as students learned from his mistakes, he realized the story hadn't ended. It had only just begun. You ever wish someone had told you the truth earlier in life? Not just facts, but the kind of truth that helps you see the world more clearly? Let us know in the comments. Someone else out there might need to hear it too. The town hall was packed tighter than usual, not because of a new policy, not because of media attention, but because Isaac Monroe had agreed to attend. It wasn't a speech. He'd made that clear. Just a listening session at a Veterans Resource Center outside Richmond. Casual, no stage, folding chairs, coffee in cardboard cups. Just people. But when Isaac walked in, a quiet hum rolled across the room like electricity moving under skin. People knew the face, knew the metal, knew the weight. He sat in the back, as always, not at the front. And for a while, the conversation was familiar. Housing access, medical backlogs, family reintegration. Then a man stood. Late 60s, strong frame, but hard-worn. Eyes sharp, voice rough, like it had been honed on years of bitterness. My name's Curtis Langley, he said. Sergeant First Class, airborne, retired. He didn't smile, didn't blink much either. Everyone turned. I came here tonight because I've got a bone to pick with Mr. Monroe. The room froze. Curtis took a step forward, while the rest of us were scraping by, wondering why nobody gave a damn. You get discovered on a plane, and suddenly you're a damn movement. Someone coughed. Chairs creaked. Isaac looked up slowly. I respect your service, Curtis said, eyes narrowing. But don't mistake that for admiration. The air changed. Isaac didn't rise, didn't flinch. He just nodded once. Go on. Curtis stepped closer. 20 years. I've been trying to get someone to look at my file. I lost my hearing in Fallujah. VA said it was age. Took 8 years to get partial benefits. No medal, no media. Just forms and rejection letters. He pointed a finger, not quite shaking, but not still either. You were gone, disappeared. The rest of us stayed and kept knocking. The room was silent now. Not defensive, not hostile, just hurting. Curtis's voice cracked slightly. Then one day, boom! The whole country's standing for you. Meanwhile, I've got buddies who died in motel rooms with eviction notices in their pockets. Isaac stood then, slowly, with effort, and he stepped forward. 2 steps, then 3, until they stood eye to eye. I know, Isaac said quietly, and I don't deserve the way they clapped. Not more than you, not more than the ones we lost. Curtis blinked, confused. Isaac continued. I didn't ask for cameras. I didn't ask to be found. I didn't even think I deserved to be. He paused. But this isn't about me. It never was. The only reason my name is on anything is because somebody made a mistake, and someone else finally noticed. He looked Curtis square in the eye. And if that notice means more people finally listen to you, Then use it. Don't fight it. Use it. Curtis said nothing, just breathed. Deep, shaky, quiet. A woman in the front row wiped a tear. A man behind her grunted in agreement. Then Curtis nodded. Once, and sat down. No applause, no music swell. Just a moment of two soldiers standing in a room that understood both pride and pain. After the session, Isaac stepped outside for air. Curtis followed him out a few minutes later. "I was angry," he said simply. "Didn't even know at what." Isaac nodded. Sometimes it's easier to point it at a person than a system. Curtis looked at him sideways. "I didn't think you'd show up tonight." "I almost didn't," Isaac replied. "But I figured if I didn't, someone would say I'm hiding again." Curtis chuckled. "You still got that medal?" Isaac tapped the breast pocket of his jacket, not where people can see it. Curtis took a deep breath. Maybe that's why people believe you. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a photo. 3 men, young, laughing. One of them was Curtis. Another had his arms slung across his shoulder. The third held a beer and wore dog tags around his neck. "He died 2 years ago," Curtis said. "Liver failure. Never even got VA coverage. Said he didn't trust him anymore." Isaac took the photo gently, studied it, handed it back. "We carry too many ghosts," he said. Curtis nodded. "But not tonight," Isaac added. "Not this one." Later that week, something unexpected happened. Curtis Langley sent an email to the Monroe Center in Baltimore. "Met the man. Said some things I needed to say. Heard things I needed to hear. Don't want a medal. Don't need a speech. But if you ever build a wall in that center for the forgotten ones, I'd like to add a name." Attached was a scanned photo, and beneath it, a name typed in all caps. PVT Tyrell Banks, Fallujah, 2004. Still one of us. Back at the center, Isaac printed the email and pinned it to the bulletin board. No announcement, no post. Just a quiet addition to the wall. The beginning of something bigger. You ever hold on to resentment for so long it starts to feel like home? What helped you let it go? Let us know. You never know who's reading and might need to hear it. The Monroe Veterans Center opened that morning like any other. Coffee brewed. Folders were restocked. The receptionist flipped the open sign just after 8 o'clock a.m. But one thing was different. Isaac Monroe wasn't there. No call, no message, just absence. At first, no one panicked. Isaac had skipped mornings before. Sometimes to meet with school officials, sometimes to sit in quiet cemeteries where names outlived faces. But by noon, Marcus stopped by. And when he walked past the front desk, he noticed something taped to Isaac's usual seat by the window, a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, it means I finally listened to my own advice. I've shown up long enough. It's your turn now. Keep the coffee hot, keep the door open, and whatever you do, don't wait for permission to care. Isaac." Underneath the note was a ring of keys and a smaller envelope marked, "For Marcus." Inside that envelope was another note. This one longer, folded carefully, and sealed with the words, "Read this when the building is quiet." So that's exactly what Marcus did. That night, after everyone had left, he sat at the same window where his father once watched the world pass by unnoticed. And he unfolded the letter. "Son, if you're reading this, I've already stepped away. Not because I'm done, but because I finally believe. Maybe I don't have to carry it all myself anymore. I used to think silence was protection, that staying invisible was safer than being remembered for the wrong reasons. But I was wrong. Silence becomes weight, and if no one speaks, the forgotten stay forgotten. I didn't fix the system, I didn't even fight it, I just outlived it. And somehow, that was enough to make people pay attention. If there's one thing I want you to keep sharing, it's this. Don't wait for someone to call your name. See people now, especially the ones no one else is looking at. I'm going to spend the rest of my days off the grid. I've got some old names I still owe conversations to, some cemeteries to visit, maybe even a few apologies to make. I'm not leaving you with answers, just a door. You decide how wide to keep it open. Your father, Isaac. Marcus sat still for a long time. The room was dark now, except for the small lamp in the corner. Outside, a drizzle tapped softly against the windows, like the world itself had slowed down to take a breath. Then Marcus stood, took the note, and walked to the bulletin board near the front desk. He pinned it up, right next to the one from Curtis Langley. He didn't say anything, didn't try to explain. He just left it there where others could find it. 3 weeks later, somewhere in Texas, a group of veterans gathered around a small mobile clinic. The van wasn't fancy, but the line outside stretched around the block. Inside, a woman in a volunteer shirt handed out information packets labeled Monroe Resource Kit for those still waiting. When asked where the idea came from, she just said, "He used to drink coffee and listen. Turns out, that's all some folks ever needed." In a classroom in Oregon, a 12-year-old stood in front of her class, holding a laminated photo of Isaac Monroe. He didn't shout, he didn't demand, but when the world forgot him, he came back without anger and made sure no one else got left behind. Her teacher blinked back tears. That day, 4 students in that class wrote letters to family members they hadn't talked to in years. And in a small church in Kansas, a Sunday school leader placed a simple framed card on the bookshelf. Just a name. Isaac Monroe. We never met, but you made me pay attention. Below it, a jar, labeled Gas Fund for Local Veterans. They raised $372 the first week. Isaac never came back to the center. No one knew exactly where he went. But sometimes, a handwritten postcard would arrive. No return address, just a few lines. Met a man in Georgia who buried his medals in a shoebox under his porch. We dug them up, and he smiled like he hadn't in 30 years. Or, talked with a shelter cook in Nebraska. Turns out his brother never got listed in the system. We filed the paperwork together. He cried like it was 2007 again. Or simply, still listening. Keep the door open. Marcus never tried to track him, because he knew better. Isaac hadn't disappeared again. He had just finally gone where he belonged, to the people still waiting to be seen. You ever feel like your story doesn't matter? That maybe you missed your chance to be remembered? Here's a reminder from Isaac Monroe. You're not forgotten. You're just waiting for someone to look close enough. Be that someone for someone else. Isaac Monroe was never a hero out of Hollywood. He didn't stand on stages under bright lights. He didn't demand justice with shouting or headlines. He just sat with a cup of coffee, steady eyes, and a quiet sentence. I'm still here. From a homeless veteran humiliated on a flight, to the name behind a national reform, Isaac became the voice for thousands who were left behind, not by accident, but by silence. But he never chased fame. He left the medal. He passed the keys. And then he disappeared. Not into darkness, but into the places no spotlight ever reached, where someone still waited to be seen. Thank you for staying with us through the end of this journey. If Isaac's story made you pause, if it changed the way you see quiet people or those this world often overlooks, tell us in the comments. What part stayed with you the most? And if you've ever known an Isaac Monroe in real life, someone who never asked for recognition but left a mark just by showing up, share their name. Because sometimes, that's all it takes. A name, a memory, a moment. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the only thing someone needs is for you to actually see them. Have you ever watched someone carry years of silence until one moment brought it all to the surface? In this chapter, what began as a tense confrontation between Isaac Monroe and Sergeant First Class Curtis Langley became something far more profound. A reckoning. Curtis stood up not just to challenge Isaac's sudden rise, but to voice the frustrations of countless veterans who'd been left behind. And Isaac, with that same quiet strength we've seen all along, didn't defend his own honor. he lifted up others. He reminded us that true leadership isn't about standing in the spotlight. It's about shining that light on those who've been overlooked. That's exactly why we tell these stories on Telltales, because real life isn't always loud. It's often found in a single exchange, a moment of recognition, a shared understanding. It's in the soldier who hasn't been paid proper benefits for years, finally heard because one man refused to disappear. So, let me ask you, where are you watching from today? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. We're curious how far this conversation is reaching. And here's something to think about. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Maybe it was at work, in a relationship, or even in your own family. What happened when someone finally saw you? Share that story below. Your experience could be the encouragement someone else needs right now. Isaac didn't plan to spark a movement. He never asked for recognition. He just showed up, listened, and quietly changed the game. If his journey resonates with you, stick around. More Telltales chapters are coming, each one a reminder that the softest voices can leave the biggest impact. If this chapter moved you, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more powerful true life stories, and let us know your thoughts. Your voice matters, because sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to stay silent. Thanks for being part of the story.